let's chat about put a little bow on, although this will not be the end of this, I'm sure, but the trans madness from this last Easter weekend. What's your conclusion about that?
I think that it's really potentially a major mistake for Biden on an issue where he probably, despite how offensive all of the trans stuff is to conservative audiences, I feel like it doesn't necessarily move the needle for a lot of just normal people, a lot of Gen Z people. I think a lot of people still see the group of trans Americans as a small group of people and are generally live very challenging lives anyway. And they don't love the general take on, for example, right-wing Twitter, where there's a lot of anger and animosity towards this group of people. And I think that a lot of people who are more casual political observers do not see this issue the same way that the people in this audience do. I have to say, though, when you start doing stuff like putting Trans Day of Visibility on the most holy day of the year, and then you start banning religious symbols from the festivities at the White House for that most holy day of the year, and you've got a president who talks about being a Catholic all the time, and it talks about how his faith informs his opinions, all of a sudden people start thinking, wait a minute, there's something up. There's something going on. And then he comes out, and he kind of let the cat out of the bag yesterday by saying that, or the White House did, that they're now denying that they made Easter Sunday Transgender Day of Visibility and calling it misinformation. And now people know that that's not true. They know that that did happen. So this feels like something that could be a major narrative. It could be something that you hear talked about at the RNC. And I think that one thing, being a Biden expert, as I am at this point, one thing that I think that is really important is that he's hoodwinked people into thinking that he's compassionate, that he's really a good guy. Joe Biden is a terrible guy, and he's one of the worst people I've ever come across in politics. And people don't understand this. And this is the type of stuff I do think wakes people up to, oh, wait a minute, maybe he's not that nice of a guy. Maybe he's not that compassionate, because he's not compassionate to Catholics. He's not compassionate to Christians.
I was going to say,
he's not that. Yeah.
I was going to say, what's not nice about this? Because obviously the idea is he's tolerant and loving towards the trans.
Yeah, but he's not tolerant and loving towards the Christians. And I think that's I think what people start considering. But I'll tell you, the story that blew me away yesterday it was actually from Sunday, but I didn't notice it until yesterday, is the D.C. Cardinal Wilton Gregory, who I used to go and sit in the pews when he would preach.
Oh, cool.
Because when I lived in D.C., when he became cardinal of the area, and there's, I think, 15 cardinals in the country, then you are essentially function as the pastor of the Cathedral of St. Matthew the Apostle in the West End of D.C., which is where I would go to church. And so I would sit in the pews, and he's a incredible orator. He's not a right-winger. He was anti-Trump. He's a left-wing guy. And now he's one of the 15 most powerful Catholics in the country. And he came out and he said Joe Biden is a cafeteria Catholic. He says he picks and chooses elements of his faith. He ignores and contradicts himself. And he shies away from the challenging elements of faith. And he only embraces the stuff that he, quote, uses the current situation as a political pawn. So when you've got left-wing, inner-city Catholics coming at Joe Biden's Catholic faith, something is clearly eroded in terms of people's trust in this guy. And that, to me, is a awesome development.
Yeah, I like that. On the religious part, you would think, because I always like breaking things down, and you did this a moment ago, between us and your average person who's not listening to Sirius XM Patriot at 7:10 Central Time, right? And there's two different conversations that always need to be having, almost two different analyses of anything. You would think that the hypocrisy, at the very least, of this cafeteria Catholicism would make an impact outside of our bubble, and I think it does. But then you have someone like a Mike Johnson, the speaker, who lives his faith truly, deeply, profoundly, and he only gets criticized for it. So I don't know what to do with that exactly.
Yeah, well, I think that there's an element of insincerity about Joe Biden that people have missed. And I think that there's anyone who's a sincere a follower of a specific theology is inevitably going to run into contradictions. There's weak points with every faith and strength with every faith as well. So it's not a clean process. It's not an easy process to embrace a certain theology. So I think that if you're a conservative, then people are very quick to point out where you're hypocritical, where you might overdo it, where you might underdo it. It's very common to talk about that in public life. But when you're a liberal Democrat like Joe Biden, then it's not discussed. And I think that now the fact that it is being discussed sends a signal to me that his coalitions are eroding. And that is something that Joe Biden's cornerstone of his success has been. He's been able to motivate these blocks of people throughout his life. And that's why he panders to the blue-collar guys, because he knows he needs those people. It's why he doesn't touch inner-city crime, because he knows he needs inner-city people. That's why he's a big government guy, because he needs the green people. And the people who are sort of single-issue type people, the abortion crowd, which comes up here. And Gregory talked about this specifically, about how it's obviously not a Catholic abortion position, which is his position is abortion is okay until apparently a few days after the baby's born. And if I'm being incorrect, please go and fact check me on it, because what is the position then of the standard Democrat standard bearer right now in politics? It's got to be up at least until the day of birth, right? So obviously Catholics don't agree with that. And then so how does he deal with it? He just doesn't deal with it. And the media allows for that. Will they allow for that for the rest of the year? Maybe. I don't know.
You mentioned base eroding. So just the other day, he made the claim that the Democratic Party is more united than ever, and his proof was the big fundraiser they had in New York City on Friday. Now, of course, Breitbart highlighted the fact that Donald Trump went to the wake of the New York City police officer who was shot Guy Abayo, who's been arrested 21 times already.
Yeah.
And at the same time, Biden was at this big fundraiser at Radio City Music Hall hosted by Stephen Colbert with Clinton, Obama, and himself, the Three Stooges, as Trump called them. And it was Bill Kristol who said the optics of this are really bad, obviously, politically for the Democrats. But David Axelrod came back and said, yes, it looks bad, but $26 million is worth it. And the people who forget about the bad optics from last Friday and the $26 million will go a long way. What are we to do with this fundraiser that happened on Friday?
Yeah, always smart to cite Axelrod, because he's the Democrat who's the most credible on the stuff. His analysis is generally the most accurate of any of the Democratic analysts. So I think that's a good call. And I do tend to agree with him. I do think people will probably forget about this. But it was another bad day for Biden, though. I mean, it looked terrible. Trump looked great. And I do think it just reminds a few more people who really is the compassionate one and the one who has any connection to normal American people. Bizarrely, it's the blue-collar billionaire and not the guy who claims to represent Pennsylvania and Delaware and, middle America. Biden has no connection to America. He's been a politician for 50 years. He doesn't get it. He doesn't get what's important to people. And he was not going to miss the opportunity to do this historic fundraiser. But I think that the point that the Democrats are united, as evidenced by that fundraiser, does ring true to me, because those are huge hauls. And I document a lot of prior Hollywood fundraising in Breaking Biden. Obviously, it came out before this past weekend. But I make this point a lot, is that Hollywood being willing to empty their pockets for this 1,000-year-old man who has no connection to them whatsoever, other than that Joe Biden is responsible more than any human being on the planet for selling out Hollywood to China, which is maybe my favorite chapter of the book. He hurt China in a major way. I'm sorry, he hurt Hollywood in a major way, and they still do this. It does show you that they're dead serious about getting him reelected, and that is something that is going to be news to a lot of conservatives, that they're that serious about getting him back in the White House.
Yes, so we spent the last hour talking about how the elites have sold out the middle class, or the working class, with, what's the name of the book? Here it is, Second Class, How the Elites Betrayed America's Working Men and Women by Bhajangar Sargon. So we talked to her about that. Equally, Biden has sold out Hollywood to China, but they don't seem to care. So, and what's going on there? Well, how do they not see that connection? They hate Trump that much.
Yeah, well, also the executives in Hollywood are responsible for. I mean, everyone was in on it. It's the Jeffrey Katzenberg is the other person who's most responsible. But to sum up the chapter, and definitely I hope everyone picks it up and reads it, but to sum it up in a nutshell, Joe Biden and Xi Jinping, when they were their respective number twos in their country, they forged a deal that would open up the Chinese market to American films, and however, there are so many conditions that were put in place on what American movies would make it in, and the Chinese censors move at their own paces. So they don't move on DreamWorks' schedule or Miramax's schedule or Universal Pictures' schedule. They move when they want. So what ended up happening is we ended up self-censoring, and we ended up changing all of our art in anticipation of trying to get it into China. And then even though the quota was much higher of how many American movies could make it in, China ended up admitting fewer and fewer American movies, coming up with excuses after excuses. And so we ended up censoring all of our art, neutering it, cutting out so much fun stuff that what made American movies special. And we ended up doing worse at the Chinese box office than we did originally. And this was a big bait and switch. Xi Jinping did it, and Biden was the patsy because Biden cut all the deals. And the other patsy was Jeffrey Katzenberg, who is one of the main bundlers for Joe Biden, as he was for Barack Obama, and maybe more than any other person, got Barack Obama nominated over Hillary Clinton, if you want to go that far back. So this is all completely unknown to the public. Almost no one knows that Joe Biden did this, that he's responsible for the destruction of Hollywood more than any other individual. And he's gotten a total pass on it, as evidenced by what happened this weekend.